Okay, hello, it's lovely to be here. Thank you for arranging. Last time I was here, I was presenting with a friend of mine who can't be here today, but she was a dermatologist, so we were talking about the incidence of skin cancer in Ambridge. Today I'm moving back onto my own sort of territory and looking a little bit at Shakespeare and Ambridge and seeing what we think about that. So, somewhere around the turn of the 16th, 17th century, a playwright by the name of William Shakespeare wrote a play, As You Like It. It's one of his pastoral plays. Some might say that it's an everyday tale of country folk, depending on whether or not your idea of what everyday is includes dukes and jesters and runaway lovers. Now, one of the more memorable speeches in that play is by the melancholic character Jaques. He starts off by suggesting that all the world's a stage, and it's populated by men and women. So well done, Jaques, you've got men and women in there. We started off rather well. And it started me thinking, how might William Shakespeare chronicle the goings-on if he were tasked with doing a contemporary drama in a rural setting? How would he reflect upon the village of Ambridge and its inhabitants? And how do they tie in with the 7 ages of man that Jaques sets out? So, of course, the first problem is, after his good start, he only goes on to look at male roles. Well, I'm not going to do that because I don't want to be accused of making Ambridge a sexist place. I understand that can be problematic. So I have considered both men and women for each of the stage. I have missed out hundreds of characters, both of Shakespeare's and of Ambridge, so you'll just have to forgive me for if I've missed out any of your particular favourites. So, the first part then is played by a mewling infant. Now, the newest inhabitant of Ambridge is, of course, Rosie Ruth Grace Archer, or Rosie Ruth Archer Fairbrother, Grace, or Rosie Ruth Grace Fairbrother Archer. I don't think we know yet which it's to be, do we? And heaven only knows what Jill is going to make of the insertion of the third name on Sunday. Anyway, also, this infant is in its nurse's arms. Now, when Shakespeare would have been writing this, he would have probably been thinking of a wet nurse. Now, if only Pip had been able to get a wet nurse, I'm sure she would have handed that baby over as fast as she could. But she can't. So, now we know that Shakespeare himself knows something about the idea of conception outside of children, outside of marriage. So, the idea of Pip and what's his name? Toby. Conceiving a child is probably not something that would have fazed him at all. He's sort of open-minded like that. In The Winter's Tale, for example, Leontes speculates that his son Maximilius might have been fathered by somebody else, so that we know that Shakespeare has the whole idea of who fathers a child, can sometimes be problematic. So, where does that take us? Now, there are a few things that probably William Shakespeare might not have thought about. He might not have thought about the arrival of Henry via a sperm donor, but I don't think he would have ever thought about the arrangement between Broody Ian, Adam and Lexi. I don't think that's something that would have occurred to Shakespeare at all. But he does bring surrogate parents into some of his stories. Again, in The Winter's Tale, Perdita is basically brought up by surrogate parents. Now, as the children grow up, as the infant grows up, they need to go to school. And we speculate that Shakespeare went to the grammar school in Stratford. Well, we know that younger children in Ambridge go to Lower Loxley. Older children have a choice between Borsetshire Green or the private cathedral school, or further afield if you're young Rory. And then, of course, there's Borsetshire College for sixth form. I'm told that they're looking for a new deputy head. But there does overall seem to be some reluctance to go to school in Ambridge. Young George, we know, would much prefer to spend the day learning traditional skills with Eddie. Young Johnny, he seems to have been a good student when he was in Manchester, but the minute he moved to Ambridge, something seems to have happened to his schooling. He wasn't such a fan of school and starts to say that he was never very good at school. But some people do manage to make it through schooling in Borsetshire and go off to university, but with varied results. Phoebe and Alice seem to have made probably the best of their university education. I'm not sure that we could say the same about Kate. And Lily seems to be at some disconnect with university at the moment, so we're not quite sure how he's going to go. Now, the next stage that we might get is the lover. You might recognise this character here. Jazzer does seem to see himself as a bit of a lover. He does have a roving eye for the opposite sex, and we know that he can sing a ballad to somebody if need be, but I suspect his true love is for his piggy girls, and they might be putting off some of the others. I mean, there was some hope with Hannah for him, but that seems to have died away. And then we have Ambridge's newest couple, Tom and Natasha. Ooh. Now, there's some uncovered depths for Shakespeare to think about there. There's some unsuspected secrets that Tom is only just finding out about. So I think this might be a case of married in haste, repent in leisure. We will have to find out. And I'm sure Shakespeare would have had something to say about that. And one of the other things he does talk about are older couples. Couples like maybe Lillian and Justin, although I desperately miss Pussycat and Tiger. Desperately miss them. Now, so we know that Shakespeare has written about more mature relationships. He wrote about Cleopatra. Age cannot wither her, nor custom stale her infinite variety. And I'm sure we could apply that to Lillian. She certainly had a bit of a variety in her love life. So, and also there's that awful thing. I can definitely imagine Lillian bathing in ass's milk, but I really want her to stay away from snakes. So, now, the next stage that we look at is the soldier. Now, Shakespeare obviously has no worries writing parts for soldiers or warriors. We've got regal heroes like Henry V with his armies attacking France. We've got soldiers coming back from battle in Much Ado About Nothing, where they're looking for some rest and recuperation with the ladies. So he'd have no problems at all telling us about the stories that coming back from Second Lieutenant Dan Hebden-Lloyd. That's Dan, not Daniel. Dan does seem to be missing in action at the moment, so we're not sure what's happened to him. But I think there are some warriors that Shakespeare might not have thought about. He might not have come across the local Ambridge eco-warrior Kirsty Miller, or Patrick, or Tom in his younger days when he seemed to have some sort of social conscience. So we have, I'm not really sure if that's Kirsty, but I think it is. So, certainly the soldier character is something, if Shakespeare were to chronicle the tales of Ambridge, and I say chronicle, not write, because there's a difference there. So, what about the next stage of life? We have the justice, a fair round belly with good capon lined. I see Neil Carter here. I always think of him as one of, he's pretty full up on chili, isn't he? So his tummy might well be getting portly. I always think of him as one of the Archer's nicest and fairest characters. He has an unending supply of necessary patience with Susan. He's down to earth, he's principled, and he's certainly full of wise saws. So it's really no surprise that he was perhaps voted chair of the parish council. His kindly wisdom really perhaps ought to be listened to more. And another person that we have who's rather quick to judge is Jim Lloyd, the retired professor of classics. He's certainly been giving out judgment this week with his words to Schuyler. But Jim, I think, also has a kindly side to him. And he's the one who took in Jazzer when Jazzer was homeless. He's the one, his relationship with Alistair seems to have improved greatly since Alistair's left Shula, and certainly since they conjured up the idea of a birthday party for Alistair. Now, I did have another slide here, and I forgot to put it on before I sent them. And I had a lovely, lovely picture of Linda, who I think also can maybe fulfill this justice role. Because one of the things that strikes me about Linda is she also demonstrates a deep seam of underlying kindness. And perhaps if the justice role is able to be just and give out wisdom, perhaps Linda does fall into that, although she is really annoying sometimes. But you remember the scenes with her and Kate a few years back? She does seem to tie into that. So what happens now? Well, we're moving rather quickly on. The pantaloon. Peggy Woolley. I think Jake Quiz is wrong here. I don't think anybody would get away with calling Peggy Woolley a slippered pantaloon. I don't think letting oneself go is something that Peggy would adhere to. Certainly not with her regular trips to Seaford Breeze to get her hair done. But, on the other hand, poor Joe. He seems to be very close to Shakespeare's description of the seventh age. You can sometimes hear his voice catch when he talks about his poor Susan, or more latterly when he talks about poor Nick. He definitely seems to be shrinking physically and in character, especially now that he's having to come to terms with leaving Grange Farm. And I'm sure Clary will testify that he's already sans teeth. But what about the rest? I think he's heading towards sans everything. Oh. So, to sum up very briefly, he's gone. I think if William Shakespeare were to chronicle the goings-on in Ambridge, there would be certainly nothing to faze him here, and he might make a good job of providing a temporary drama in a rural setting. Thank you.
Isn't that lovely? Thoughts, comments? Helen? Yes, this is questions. Come back.
We thought really that this final stage, the second childishness and mere oblivion, we don't actually see anybody of that in Ambridge because they all disappear mysteriously into the laurels.
They do disappear into the laurels, but don't forget that Jack entered his second childhood, didn't he, with that really long storyline that was so well done.
Yes. But again, he was in a care home and away from his community. I think it's really interesting that nobody looks after older parents with dementia at home.
No, but Clary's doing a pretty good job of caring for him. I mean, she even does his toenails. Yeah.
Well, better a care home than a car park.
Yes.
If you think of Heather Pet. Shall we move on? Oh no, another question. Come back.
Stop trying to run away.
It occurs to me that perhaps Jill is entering her second childhood.
Ooh la la.
Oh la
Second
la.
adolescence.
Actually, well, or her lover stage. Ooh, controversial. I don't want to think about that.
Leonard with Tom Wrigglesworth's dad. Right, let's move on. Yeah, click the slide. So we've got next. So we were doing the photos downstairs, and I was like, Rob, you wrote in this book, and he was like, no. And I was like, Rob, you wrote in this book, no. And I was like, how can he be the crowd favourite?